Hey, I'm Alex. I'm an alcoholic. This is really cool. I love the fact that people are all over. You know. I'll just tell my story. I um, My sobriety date is January 3rd, 2003. Um, I got sober when I was 20 years old. Um, I was in college at the time, and I was miserable and um, felt like I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to live either. Um, and through a series of interesting events, it came to my attention that drugs and alcohol might be part of the problem. Um, so um, I'm from Miami, Florida. It is. I see somebody here is in Miami. It's an interesting place to grow up. You grow up pretty fast if you're exposed to the best things Miami has to offer. I certainly was. Um, when I was really young, I never intended to be an alcoholic or use drugs. In fact, I won a contest in elementary school for writing a rap song about how I would never do drugs. And But I did feel really different. Um, Maybe because I was the type of kid who wrote rap songs about not doing drugs, um, but I felt alien. I felt like, as far back as I can remember, I felt like people had gotten a rule book to how to behave, and I never got it. And I don't think that is part of my alcoholism. I know that sometimes people identify those kinds of feelings as part of their alcoholism. I don't. But I do think it's a huge part of why I started drinking. Um, and in many cases, it was a part of why I continued to drink even when I knew it wasn't good for me. So as I got older, I was different, so I got picked on. And as I got older, I figured, the best defense is a good offense. So I channeled all of that kind of like fear and inferiority into um, anger and hate and bullying. And that worked in terms of like inflating my ego and making me feel superior. But I still had this like gnawing guilt thing. And and then one night, in fact, my parents used to work in a business where they literally got just tons of free alcohol. And I stole a bottle of Captain Morgan's with a friend and two girls, and we went out to the beach. This is Miami again. And I polished off a third of it, and he polished off a third, and they killed the rest. And I had like a white light experience. Like the stars in the sky were bright, and I felt confident like I've never felt before. I felt completely at ease. I didn't feel the need, in fact, to be a jerk or a loser. I just felt okay. And I remember thinking, this is it. Like, this must be what I've been missing this whole time. This is why people drink alcohol. I just needed to like be old enough to get to, the mature age of 13 to be able to appreciate this. And like, now I'm going to be good from here on out. And I know that reading like Bill's story, that's like one of the things that hit me was like, he keeps saying like, I had arrived. And at 13, I finally felt like I had arrived. And to be honest, it was a great solution to all the problems that I had. I grew up in a house where there was a lot of fighting. My parents worked together, and so they were always bickering. I actually came from a divorced household. So when I say my parents, I mean my stepdad and my mom, because I also had a relationship with my father who loved to drink too. And as a result, my mom was always warning me like, you're going to end up like your dad. Your dad has like a problem with alcohol. And I was like, maybe he's just not, like you're just uptight. You know what I mean? Like you're probably the reason he drank so much, whatever, like in my mind, I was like, he's the cool guy. And my mom is like the anxious fear monger. And so I drank, and I smoked a lot of pot. And I did whatever drugs were kind of like around. And that was my solution for a long time. I ran into some problems with it in high school. They found weed in my room. And so that was a problem when I was 15. And my immediate reaction was, I got to go to rehab, which is a weird reaction to have when you're 15. It's the first time you get caught for pot. But I think it was twofold. Like, one, the idea of not having this like at least daily medicine that I could sneakily have, unlike alcohol, on a regular basis, was unfathomable. Like, I was terrified of not being able to get high or drunk. And also I just kind of thought it was like, I knew when people got in trouble for like DUIs and they like went to the judge and said they had a problem, they got like reduced sentences, So I think like part of it was like me trying to negotiate for a reduced sentence. But as a result, I got this guy who would come to my house because my mom was too ashamed to send me to a rehab because she's, other people would see me there, even though they would also be there. But that logic was sort of lost on her. And this guy came and talked to me about alcoholism. He was an alcoholic. He was also a counselor. And he would ask me questions about like, what do I feel taken care of in my life? What does it feel like when I get drunk and everybody has to take care of me? Like, is there something to that? Why, if I know there's consequences, do I continue to do it? So anyway, it was interesting, but like not interesting enough that I was going to like stop. So for 9 months I pissed clean. I had a couple of slips where I like went out one night and got really blacked out drunk and pissed my pants and threw up all over myself. But outside of that, like, straight A's in the rehab program. And then I got out and I was like, cool, like, let's get fucked up. And so I just started doing it again. And again, like at this point in my life, 16, 17, 18, this is like a really solid solution to my problems. Like, I was a straight A student when I was a kid. I was no longer a straight A student. So that like, trade off, but I was a loser when I was a little kid. At least this is how I thought of it at the time, and now I was like kind of cool and okay, and then, I got into this college in New York City and I was like, okay, finally, like I can get away from these people who just kind of get in the way of my fun and have no consequences. And I got to this school and my roommates, the first thing we did was put a little weed from each of the places we were from and like smoke it together like a peace pipe. And I found the only guy in my dorm who could drink more than me. And that guy became like my number one running buddy. Blackouts galore. But what happened was that it just stopped being as effective. Like, that was the big problem for me, is it was like not, I didn't like blacking out. Like in Miami, a lot of people like to take Xanax while they drink. And I never understood that because I was a blackout drinker. So I didn't like blacking out. I loved being fucked up. I did not like blacking out because then I couldn't remember all the fun I was having when I was drunk, because I was a very happy drunk. I was very unhappy when I was not drunk, but I was a very happy drunk. And I wanted to remember that, and I couldn't. So I never took Xanax. I took it, but I didn't like taking it because, I called it surrendering early, because it was just like bringing this blackout, and when I got to college, these blackouts were just like almost unavoidable. Like every time it seemed like I would drink, I would either black out or I'd just be really uncomfortable. Like, it was like have one beer and like grip the table, or have 2 beers and then end up blacking out. And so a friend of mine gave me this, like, I was really depressed. I was like, nobody likes me. I kind of like felt again how I felt in elementary school when I felt like the outcast, except I was drunk. So like now I felt like the outcast and I was drunk, and the alcohol wasn't curing the different thing, And so I tried to stop. I read this like Buddhism book, and they were like, alcohol and drugs are toxins, and you can't be happy if you're consuming those things. And so I was like, you're right. I'm going to put this down for like a little while, it was like a month or something. And then it was like, a month is a long time, like 3 weeks, and I remember I had like gone around my whole dorm swearing to everybody that I would never I was done smoking pot. Like, that's it. I was done. And the very next day I was high, and this girl saw me high and she goes, weren't you not? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, you can't go one day. And it like rang in my head, and I couldn't, like, almost like mad at her, like, fuck you, but like also, you're right. I was like, no, I can't go one day, And that was like the first real time I heard myself say it out loud. So what happened, to kind of speed through it, is I figured out that what I really needed was a girlfriend. I reached out to a girl that I had been dating previously. As it turned out, she no longer partook in drugs and alcohol because she got really into cocaine and ecstasy. And as a result of that, ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I started going to meetings with her, and it was cool. I wasn't an alcoholic or anything, but like I stayed sober for like a little while, and eventually I left. This was in Miami. I went back to New York, and, it was a friend's birthday, and they weren't pressuring me to drink, but I was pressuring me to drink. And so I had a drink, and I blacked out again that night. And I was like, well, fuck it. I already blacked out and clearly have a bad problem. So I'm just going to keep doing it, which is an illogical solution, but that's what I came up with. And all this time I was starting to kind of lose my mind. I thought I was having messianic thoughts, like, oh, maybe I'm the second coming of Jesus, and that's why I've always felt so different. And I was telling this girl that, and she's like, I'm trying to get sober. You're really freaking me out. Leave me alone. And I was like, you're right. I'm just going to go get more fucked up. And finally I like knew I knew that I was either going to off myself or I was going to try this, right? It was like, that was kind of like, I was like, either I'm just going to drink myself to death or kill myself, or maybe I'll give this AA thing. Maybe I am an alcoholic. I don't know. I'll give it a shot. So I started going to meetings again. This time I picked up, they had chips. I like took a white chip. I like raised my hand. I said I was new. There was a guy from New York who was visiting Miami. This was, these breaks in between college. And the girl sort of pushed me and was like, you need to go to meetings when you go back to New York, or otherwise the same thing's going to happen again. And I went up to this guy to ask him if he knew any meetings. And he was like, he just looked at me like side-eyed, and he was this tough dude from Queens, leather jacket and like goatee and his long hair. And he was like, let me ask you a question. Do you really think you're alcoholic? And what he said it like in a gravelly kind of Queens voice, but like he said that, and I was, it hit me, because until that point, months of going to AA, I walked into meetings and people were like, hey, you're alcoholic. Cool, stay. Come to another meeting. Like, you're in the right place. Like, you must be exactly like me and no different. And that, for me, freaked me out. Like people making all these assumptions about me when they didn't know me. And here was a guy who did the opposite of that. And he was like, I'm not really sure you belong here. Like, why should I help you? Which is a weird tactic to kind of take, but he was there. And I said, and the words kind of flew out of my mouth, and I said, I don't know, man, I just can't stop drinking. And that was the first time I had ever said that. And I have to say, I think that was like, I read the book and we did some work around it, but I think that was really like my first step moment, where I like finally admitted to myself, like, I'm pretty powerless over this, and this shit has become unmanageable, So anyway, he was trying to buy me a big book, which I was like freaked out about. I didn't know, he was like speaking in tongues to the person who handled the literature, and he was like pulling out money, and I pulled out my money to make sure that the cult guy wasn't buying me a weird book, and he's like, I don't give a fuck, you buy it. I'm like, whatever. So I bought the book, and then he pointed to the page that said Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was like, read from here, and he went to the end of the Roman numerals, and he was like, to here, which is the end of the doctor's opinion, and then call me. And I said, okay. And I'm just making sure I'm okay on time. And I did, because I was terrified. of drinking because I really felt like I couldn't do it. And he was surprised that I had called him. He's like, I say that to all the girls basically, and none of them call. And you called, so that's a good first sign. And then he started telling me about, what he did. And he was like, I hit my knees every morning and I pray to God that God like keep me sober. And at night I thank him. And I'm like, I mean, mind you, I was a guy who thought he was Jesus like 3 months earlier. I was like, I don't believe in God. I don't believe any of this stuff. That's silly, And he was like, great. So say that and then do the thing that I'm telling you to do. And so I would hit my knees like every day and go, I don't believe anyone is actually hearing this, and then I would say it. And lo and behold, not only did I start getting sober, right, and putting together consistent days, but about 60, 90 days in, the obsession, because I had this daily tape in my head of like, okay, today it would be different because X, or fuck this shit, right? Like this thing of like coming up with a reason why it would be okay to get fucked up again. And that went away. Like it switched to, no man, you were fucking miserable. Look how miserable you were. You don't want this shit, and what made that sort of stick around was I started doing the rest of the work, like I did this 4-step that, is like all the people I'm mad at and all the fears I have and all the women that I, been with that, I didn't behave the way I really wanted to behave, and asking myself tough questions like, what kind of man do you actually want to be, and I went out and started, making amends, like hitting up people who I had screwed over. And I'm like, hey, I'm really sorry about this. Is there anything I can do to make it up to you? And some of those people who I thought were going to be really pissed off were like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, we're cool. You're cool. Like, I'm glad that this is happening for you. And other people were like, who I thought were going to be super cool, were like, you're a piece of shit. And let me explain to you the 7 things you didn't mention that you've been doing, But I got through all that. And when I did, something really kind of like lasting hit me, where that feeling of feeling different from everybody that I had always felt, that I had used alcohol and drugs to help mitigate, that later alcohol and drugs stopped working for, that went away. And I started, look, I mean, of course, I walk up to a group of people, we're having a conversation. My first feeling is like, these people don't want to hear a single thing I have to say. And also, fuck them. They're losers. I don't want to talk to them, like simultaneously. But for the most part, that like overwhelming anxiety about feeling different and being different and all the rest of it started to go away. And I kind of started to just see myself as a guy, like just a person, which was a huge relief. And it made it so that I didn't really obsess about escape. So what it's like now is that, like, 16 years later, around 5 years, I stopped going to meetings because I moved, and I was like, you know what, the meetings in this place are all wrong and I don't like it, so I'm not going to go anymore. Around 10 years, I came very close to drinking, and my personal life was a disaster. I started going to meetings again because I had a friend who needed to get sober, and the only way I knew how to get somebody sober was through AA. Started going to meetings with him, and I finally sort of copped to the fact that I wasn't okay. And around that time, I sort of made a new arrangement, and I developed a new conception of a higher power. Because a lot of what happened to me between years 5 and 10 was that this idea of like a God, the word God, all of the connotations associated with it bugged me. And I didn't like the answers I was hearing in AA. I'd hear people say, if you want it bad enough, you'll accept whatever. And to me, that sounded like something a Scientologist says or something. And so I was not about it. And that's just me. But I knew that these steps had worked for me. I did. And I knew that the praying worked. I saw the proof, right? So there must be a way to do this. And so, I worked the steps again with a new sponsor, and had a new experience, which this time was heavy on the experience and not as heavy on the like belief thinking part. And I don't use the word God. I don't use it when I pray, but I pray. I have a conception of a higher power that's not personified. Some people would consider me an atheist. Some would consider me an agnostic. I think I'm like a militant agnostic who prays. Um, and what I know for certain is that for me, doing this work like inventory, meditation, and prayer, and specifically being part of a community, and that's why I think this is so cool, because even if you're like so spread out all over the place, we need a community of practice. Like, we need people who I hope that some of you all like know each other. You know what I mean? You see the little name in the chat and you're like, there's that person, because I think that that's a crucial component to what AA did. When like Bill and Bob, they had all these like spiritual ideas in the Oxford, but when they sat down together, that's when that like the magic sort of happened. So for me, a lot of what my program is today is not being anonymous in AA, right? Is like connecting to other alcoholics on a regular basis who know me and who I know, and being of service. So I have a commitment, I have sponsees, I do all that stuff. Yeah. So, and I have to say, like, it's not always easy. And I suffer from anxiety. I went on medication a few years ago. That was a great decision between me and my doctor, and between you and yours. And that's it. I think, I'll just close by saying that I really think that the most important thing for me in this program today is that I try to have an experience of some form of higher power, even if that means like just connecting to other people, rather than like a heady experience of like knowing something in specific. And that's what keeps me sober. So that's it. Thanks.